Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. I am very, very pleased to introduce Marilyn Johnson, whose beautiful book, Lives in Ruins, is our Authors on Stage event for today. I met Marilyn Johnson through her work several years ago when I first read her second book, which is called This Book is Overdue, and it's all about librarians. Which was obviously really fun for me, being a librarian. I was an aspiring librarian at the time. But what really fascinated me once I'd read it was how deeply Marilyn dives into her research projects. She takes on the mantle of an obituary writer from her first book, The Deadbeat, or a librarian for This Book is Overdue. And this time around, she puts on her Indiana Jones hat to become an archaeologist and find out exactly what it means to do that work of preserving and finding the human story in ruins. So I'm really excited to have her today. She's going to do a little bit different Authors on Stage program in that she really wants to talk to all of you and tell her stories. So it's going to be a little bit more intimate. She's going to sit down and have a chat. That's going to be really fun. And I want to encourage all of you, if you like programming like this, please give us the change from your coffee if you can. We have a donation box back there. And every time you give us $1, that's a vote for the kinds of programs that you like. And I pay attention. My name is Erin. I'm the programs coordinator here. And I am really excited to bring you more stuff like this going forward. We also have these, which is our Museum Madness series coming up. We offer museum passes as one of the resources at our library. And these are all of the museums in the area that you can go to for free or discounted admission. And there's a little how-to on the back, how you can check those out with your new Canaan library card and go explore the cultural riches around us for very little money. All right, without further ado, Marilyn Johnson, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to use this real quick, and then I'm going to turn on my lavalier and sit down in the equivalent of the rocking chair. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me from this? Is it working? Yes, yes? Okay, I'll just project. I've been talking about this book since November of last year, and I started in this area in Connecticut, and at Reading and Darien, and I was in Norwalk last week. And I have to say, Connecticut is the best place to talk about this book. It's been fantastic. There is such a sense of history here, and there are so many people who are archaeologists, amateur archaeologists, or people who collect personal history and for whom it's alive for them. Because I am living in Westchester County in New York, the idea was to cover archaeology from all over the world. And I was going to try to wrap my arms around the entire profession. As you might or might not know, archaeology covers the entirety of human history, which they measure to about 2.5 million years ago. And it covers not just the entire planet. Every place that a human has been, lived, or left his or her trash is a potential archaeological site. So that includes the oceans, which are full of our trash, and particularly full of shipwrecks and all kinds of consumer goods, not to mention skeletal remains. It also includes space. So there are actually space archaeologists. You'll read only glancingly about them, but there was a space archaeologist who gave me a lovely blurb for the back of the book. Space archaeologists, I don't really even know how they do it, but they account for all the trash that circles the planet. So the people who actually planted some equipment, some monitoring equipment on a comet recently, that is a potential archaeological site now. So the reach of humans, the variety of humans, and the extent of their history means that this is a staggering topic to wrap your arms around. It was insane of me to think of it. Why would I even come up with this idea? My kids were almost grown up, and one of them, the last one, was almost out of the house, and I thought I wanted more than anything as a kid to be an archaeologist, and I thought I'd love to travel and go on some digs. I think it'd be so fun. And they're collecting our personal and cultural history, just like obituary writers and librarians and archivists. And they're connecting us with our past, and I've got this neat little trio here, and I'm sure my editor is going to love this idea. Well, they did not exactly love this idea. I had to kind of talk them into it. And when I talked them into it, really the effect was me digging in and saying, no, I will write this book. I'm going to go out and do this. When I finally got the contract to do it, I sat there, it's like, I don't know any archaeologists. I quit taking science after 10th grade biology class. 10th grade was a really long time ago. I'm not in shape, to go out and do these sorts of things, and I have no skills besides, I actually have some wonderful computer skills from all the time that I spent with librarians. I am very good at describing people and trying to capture their essence from all my time with obituary writers, and that's pretty much it. So I went to work. I read like a maniac, of course, and I started writing cold notes to people. And I went to conferences. And Erin, this is for you. The difference between a librarian and an archaeologist. I went to librarian conferences to meet a bunch of librarians. Archaeology conferences, great. Archaeologists gathered in one place, all different kinds, doing presentations about their work. It was a great idea. They are crazy about beer. This I find. Librarians, white wine. Okay? So that was the big difference. And I went there with a pocket full of bar money and a perfect willingness to stand people up for whatever it was they were drinking, very clearly biased in one direction or the other, depending on the profession that you're studying. And I started listening to archaeologists, and I would go into the rooms that had the craziest titles, or the rooms that sounded the most mysterious, that I had no idea what I was getting into. And then I would try to figure my way out of it. It's like, to me, this is more fun than anything I can think of. It's like imagining the hardest thing that you can to do, and then seeing if you can keep yourself alive, and then seeing if you can get away with writing a book about it. There are a lot of other writers I know who would tell you the same thing, that half of the fun is in trying to see if you can do what it is that you've set out to do. What I would like to do, because I'm a little bit toward the end of a longish tour and wacky and might forget some things, I would like to ground us by reading just the first page and a half of the book. The first chapter is called Down and Dirty, Studying the People Who Study People. No dinosaurs appear in these pages. If you are looking for scientists who study dinosaurs, you want to pick up a book about paleontologists. This book is about archaeologists, people who study people and the things they leave behind, their bones, their trash, and their ruins. The archaeologists in this book work with humble stuff, stone tools and broken pots and dirt. They are expert in the way things fall apart and acute observers of context. The placement and surroundings of an object can make the difference between junk and intellectual gold. To the archaeologist, treasure is something that was buried, that has been brought to light. a pebble of information around which the narrative of history now needs to bend. I think of the archaeologist I saw in a loop of video, a young woman up to her hips in a muddy tunnel that would soon be a subway station in New York City, her eyes sparkling under a construction hat. We found a coin with a date on it. There is no better time than now to follow archaeologists. New finds and scientific advances keep revising what we know. The bones of a British king turn up in a parking lot. Bronze Age shoes and Viking mittens pop up in ice melts. LiDAR, an aerial mapping tool, reveals a vast and ancient city beneath Angkor Wat. Technological advances account for some of archaeology's boom, but war, commercial development, violent weather, and warming temperatures, change and destruction are doing their part to lay bare the layers of the past. The world is mutating faster than archaeologists can keep up. In fact, there aren't, in terms of numbers, very many archaeologists. It's kind of stunning, actually. Yet as their sites multiply and their profession expands, archaeologists find themselves in the same predicament as other cultural memory workers, with too little support for the hard work of salvaging and making sense of our past. How much progress can they hope to make when their goal is to capture history before it disappears forever? We think we know what archaeologists do, but like librarians, they toil behind an obscuring stereotype. The Hollywood image of the dashing adventurer bears little resemblance to the real people who, armed with not much more than a trowel and a sense of humor, try to tease one true thing from the rot and rubble of the past. So that's how the book launches. And the first archaeologist that I actually quote is a young graduate student who tells me in a kind of bragging way, when the apocalypse comes, you want to know an archaeologist because we know how to make fire, catch food, and build hill forts. Now, to me, that was just an awesome quote because, of course, they're like, in fact, one of the archaeologists that I met and took a course in, an archaeologist who is an expert in the stone tools, the lithics of the Ice Age, which makes him not a paleontologist, but a paleoarchaeologist, or paleoanthropologist, as they sometimes say. He is really like a survivalist. He goes out and takes survivalist type courses, and he has it as his mission to teach his students the skills of ancient humans, making fire, learning how to butcher animals even, learning how to build a crude shelter. These are things, learning how to make your own tools. These are things that he thinks are very important for us not to lose. And he doesn't really say, and when the apocalypse comes, they could come in really handy. But it horrifies him, as it did most of the archaeologists that I ended up meeting and getting close to for this book. It makes them crazy that we have this idea that we are some advance in the evolutionary scheme of things. That because we know how to work an iPhone 6, we're really smart, and those old, crazy cavemen and women are, the stupid ones. In fact, if you work as an archaeologist, whether you're working in a time period from way long ago or from not that long ago, a historical archaeologist working in colonial America, for instance, what you find out is the range and ingenuity of the humans who came before us are astonishing. And there are so many varieties of human genius in evidence at various kinds of archaeological sites. We really are a fascinating species. Now, has anybody in this room been on the paleo diet? This was a big sensation recently, was something called the paleo diet. Eat like early humans. Eat the stuff, the simple stuff, not the processed stuff. That would be the shorthand way to do it. But the paleo diet made archaeologists so insane that there was actually a conference on paleo diets that was called, a multi-day conference. And at it, and they were just tearing their hair out. And one of them said, finally, listen, the paleo diet is crazy. It's like we have evidence for humans eating almost anything in the world. They eat anything in the world. That's the genius of humans. They're adaptive. If they have to eat grass, they'll eat grass. If they have to eat snails, they'll eat snails. And it was, to me, it just made me laugh, because that kind of thing happens all the time with archaeologists. In fact, they know so much about us that you can see their little secret smiles. And a writer asked me last night, did any of them sort of, look at you and laugh at any of your questions? Some of my questions were astonishingly stupid now that I know more than I do, but I would say, okay, so they don't dig dinosaurs, but what if you happen to find dinosaur bones on your dig? I thought that was a reasonable question. Well, come on. I mean, really they pretty much know what they're digging for when they get to the point where they're sticking a shovel in the ground or gathering something from a site underwater. But archaeologists really were, the ones that I ended up talking to were incredibly patient. And I was telling someone else, the reviews of this book from the archaeology field in particular have been wonderful. They're really delighted to have somebody who doesn't use any of the jargon explaining what they do in a way that's accurate. And even, I do make fun of mounds and people who study mounds a little bit, because I end up in the book at Machu Picchu, which is a spectacular, I mean, you don't need to know anything about archaeology to go, wow, this is great, awesome, 500-year-old stone village in the most gorgeous natural setting, inaccessible. How did they do it without wheels? We have no idea how they did it. Talk about geniuses. And I was listening on the bus on the way up the mountain to some mound archaeologists talk about the fascinating mounds in the state of Ohio. And it was like, I'm sitting there going, they're dirt. They're piles of dirt. I don't understand what's so cool about that. And as some of you may or may not know, our latest homegrown site on the World Heritage List in America is the mounds in Poverty Point, Louisiana. Has anybody heard of these? Has anybody been there? Okay. I heard an archaeologist talking about first of all, Poverty Point. Would you not change the name of that? It's a terrible thing for something that's supposed to be a tourist attraction. Anyway, here's what's so cool about these mounds is, a long time ago, way, way longer than anybody was supposed to ever be doing this in organized groups, a group of hunter-gatherers got together and transported a tremendous quantity of dirt from one place pretty far to get to the other place. They had to do it in very fast. They had to do it within months. They figured that out. And there had to be a lot of them coordinating. And they made this place that dwarfs Stonehenge, that dwarfs Burning Man Festival, that is huge, massive. And they're like these plazas, constructions, amazing dirt constructions. We don't know anything about them. We don't know anything about the people who did it, but there they are. They're preserved, and you can go visit them, and the entire world honors them. Okay? So I make fun of mounds, and the mound archaeologist goes to review the book and says, sadly, in her otherwise wonderful book, she clearly doesn't understand mounds. And I felt so bad about this. I mean, really, I did feel bad. And so I wrote a note to the mound archaeologists, and they said, oh no, we're thrilled to be in the book. This is our teaching opportunity. So there are Every other kind of archaeologist that I could find is represented in here. There's a mummy archaeologist. There's an archaeologist who is expert in the historic period, which is, he was practicing in the Caribbean, and he was working on old slave plantations and sugar plantations, and in the enslaved people's quarters is how we were to describe that. And he was finding all kinds of stories that you don't think of, that certainly aren't in the history books, and that certainly aren't in our consciousness about what was going on in the Caribbean then. We know a lot of horrible things were happening on those sugar plantations. A lot of people were dying, and the people who ended up working in them were the only ones who could survive the insects, which, by the way, they talk about the horrors of archaeology, snakes. Indiana Jones is just, hates snakes and is crazy, gets crazy when he falls into a pit of them. Oh, greetings, Sue. I'm so glad you came. You came just in time for the Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones.
Okay, then I can leave, right?
Snakes and hairy spiders are supposed to be the horrors of what you encounter as an archaeologist. And I came across a little explanation. An archaeologist who was working in Central America said, the snakes are stupid. The hairy spiders really won't do much harm to you. A little bite, no big deal. The thing that'll kill you are the mosquitoes. And this is the truth about the Caribbean. It was the population, the only population that could survive the diseases that the mosquitoes brought were the ones who were enslaved. On this particular island that I ended up going to a dig at, it was the story of a little island that was the center of the trading universe in the late 1700s. And there were no real sugar plantations doing the actual work of growing sugar. It acted more as a kind of free port, and people would ship their sugar products there and then sort of launder them and ship them out again without, collecting taxes. So there were people from all over the world. There were goods from all over the world. And everybody who lived on the island, including people who were enslaved, participated in the black market. Really, that's what their jobs were. So it was a completely different scene than what was happening in Barbados or Jamaica. And fascinating, another reason that I loved hanging out with archaeologists, because they were finding the history stories that were not commonly known, not commonly told, or absolutely contradicting what we thought we knew about a population. So, how many kinds of archaeologists are there? No. I don't even know. They don't even know either. Truly, they don't. And they keep inventing new kinds. And they'll invent a kind in the United States, and then another kind that's something like that will be invented in the UK. And then they'll all get together and decide that they have something in common. Underwater archaeology, which is huge right now, which is the future of archaeology as the oceans rise, right? So a whole lot more sites are drowned now that didn't happen to be underwater when they were actually lived on. So that is a booming thing. They don't even all agree on what to call it. It's a relatively recent field. The entire field of archaeology is only supposedly a few hundred years old. But I ran into archaeologists who called themselves marine archaeologists. And I call it underwater archaeology because my underwater archaeologist called it that. Paleolithic archaeologists are people who deal with ancient peoples, and I have someone from that. I have a classical archaeologist. I have a historical archaeologist, and historical archaeologists are what people traditionally think of as classical. Classical archaeologists are what people traditionally think of as archaeologists. They work mainly with Greek and Roman history in the area of the Mediterranean. And they're kind of fascinating. They're very interested in the texts of the Greeks and Romans. And as one of my sources said, no, I never do that kind of archaeology. You know why? Because I'm a big guy, and all you do, if you're a big guy on a classical dig, is move big, giant piles of rock. Because there were so many earthquakes in that part of the world, and they did so much building, those crazy Greeks and Romans, and they did massive buildings, and then the earthquake would come, and then it was a rubble, and then the big, brawny archaeologist would have to, you know, sweat and hurt his back. So, there is something called contemporary archaeology, believe it or not. And that is the archaeology of 5 minutes ago or a few years ago. And these are people who use archaeological techniques to go to a site that has been recently abandoned, for instance, like a homeless encampment, or a place where people who are crossing the border illegally have camped out and left things. And they find out, because these people are so smart at reading traces of what people leave behind, they can do things like the military archaeologists, another category that I found and met a lot of fascinating people doing fascinating things. Some of them actually will go to a scene of a battlefield and reconstruct the battle based on where the footprints are, where the trash has been left, you know, where a blade might have hit a tree. You know, what it is that they do and put together is an incredibly subtle, weird, fascinating, cool art, in my opinion. There are forensic archaeologists, and these are people who work on, usually with more recent crime scenes, and they do it to an obsessive degree. They do it to a degree that they can actually give testimony in court. So when they collect the evidence, they don't just put everything found collectible in a particular trench in a plastic bag. Each thing has to be put in a separate bag and has to be labeled separately, and you have to say where it came from. I worked with a forensic archaeologist in the great, vast, creepy, full of, I'm sure, weird, murdered bodies, pine barrens. And we were looking not for, you know, mob hits, but for a 400-pound pig that had been buried a year earlier, which was a stand-in for a human corpse. In our case, a waitress that had been supposedly murdered by her husband. And we were supposed to go looking for the grave in the vast pine barrens. We were supposed to find a site, and we had learned what the signs were, and then we had to excavate it and do things and collect to that very exacting standard things like cigarette butts, which were found, and soda cans, which were found around the scene. Cigarette butts, as my forensic archaeologist teacher said, those are great to find because they're lousy with DNA, which is awesome evidence, and bad guys like to smoke. So the pig, never mind. That was a really disgusting. I do have a picture of it if you'd like to see it later. And finally, I end up in the book. I visit with military archaeologists, with contemporary archaeologists, with all kinds, and spend some time with the classical archaeologists. And I end up on Machu Picchu with archaeologists from 6 different continents, because there is an international archaeology conference that happens in Cusco, and a lot of those people have not been to Machu Picchu yet. So I got to see, you know, probably the ultimate fabulous tourist destination archaeology site with people from, with an African archaeologist and a German archaeologist, and some Australian archaeologists who are really more like Indiana Jones than anybody else. I asked them all kinds of questions, but mainly, ultimately, the main question I wanted to know is, why would anybody do this profession? Why would anybody go to the amount of trouble that these people go to? They have to know everything. They have to know everything about the time period that they're digging in. They have to know, if they're digging in a sugar plantation, they have to know all the parts of a sugar factory. They have to know what a sugar plant looks like in various stages of decay. They have to be able to, if they're dealing with historical archaeology, identify fragments of pottery and tell you where in the world they came from, or be able to figure that out. It is the geekiest kind of thing. They all have to be some sort of engineers and construction experts, because most of them are digging in some kind of housing, some kind of shelter. So they have to know how, whoever the people that they're digging, whose remains they're digging in, they have to know how they lived, how they built their houses. And so to me, it's not just like they're the construction people putting things together. They're the ones who know all the many ways it can look when it's disintegrating, when it's undergone these conditions or those conditions. Why are so many archaeologists crazy about Egypt? Everything lasts in that completely dry environment. Everything survives there. You know, why is a place like the United States so difficult to do archaeology in? Because it's got a much smaller history than the rest of the world, and because it's sometimes wet and sometimes dry. So things rot in weirdly, unpredictable ways, or ways that are much harder to predict. These people told me I was obsessed since I was a child. They knew when I was 6 years old. They knew when I was 8 years old. They knew when I was 4. When I was collecting, dirt and things from the backyard, when all I wanted to do was dig. These are people who bubbled up from all different kinds of backgrounds, and they are driven by this desire to find out what it seems often the rest of the world doesn't want them to know. Okay? They're working, many of them, and I forgot, of course, a hugely important type of archaeologist, which is a contract archaeologist. And that is an archaeologist who does work for hire, mainly for what they call in this country cultural resource management firms, CRMs. And they do this kind of work because a locality has declared that might be archaeologically sensitive. You cannot do any development there until you've assessed it. That kind of thing happens all the time, and it is a place where many things get dug up, and many things get covered up. It's a hard way to make a living. It's really kind of tough. They file a tremendous number of reports. There's an awful lot of paperwork. The legal aspects of it are unbelievably daunting. I did a chapter about a Revolutionary War graveyard, burial ground of Revolutionary War soldiers that was found in Fishkill, New York, on a spot along Route 9 where somebody wanted to build a strip mall. And they were told by the local town, you have to do some archaeology. And they went in and discovered 7 graves from the Revolutionary War era. Now, it happens to be on land that had been designated as a historic site because it's the site of the Fishkill Supply Depot. Have any of you heard of this? I mean, okay, huge nerve center of the Revolutionary War. So secret, so successful in its secrecy that even you didn't hear about it. But the British did not burn it, and they burned a lot of other places. Anyway, so this contract archaeologist is now obsessed with trying to save this particular graveyard. So it's a fascinating story. Why does he do it? He said somebody offered to pay him, how much was he being paid? $2.99 an hour or something to go dig in the woods. And he said, are you kidding me? I dig for free. And he went out into the woods. They're people who we can't do office jobs, as one of them said. We can't do office jobs. They don't want to leave the profession. There are tons of people walking around out here who have archaeological training and could not make a living as archaeologists and are now working as EMT operators, in the medical technician field frequently. and doing all kinds of other things. A fireman, I got a note from a fireman who said, you know, really I'm doing a kind of archaeology when I go into a burning house because I have to make decisions about what to save, what's worth saving at this extreme moment. But it is a matter of pride. They walk around with a kind of strut. They have sun damage. They have all kinds of bone damage. Some of them limp. You know, you can't drive them out. It's like the ones who stick to it. And I have a number of older archaeologists in here. They're like pirates. That's the way I ended up describing them. They're like pirates. They walk around and they'll sit there and tell you stories about the gross stuff that they ate, the amazing things that they discovered, the worst experience that they had, you know, the scariest moment. They are natural storytellers because often they end up in places where, well, first of all, they don't have money to go get some entertainment. But often they're just sitting around a campfire with some cheap beer, amusing each other with places of where they've been and what they've found out. So to my mind, they're fantastic company. And this book I offer so you don't have to get malaria, so you don't have to get altitude sickness, or I got seasick. Oh my goodness, I had every problem you can think of. I did not have malaria though, because I took my anti-malaria pills. But no mosquito bites. You can read the book. Free of mosquito infestation. Well, that'll be your own business if you want to sit in your backyard doing it. They also, these archaeologists explain that they do it because history matters so much to them, because they want to find the one true thing. And as the archaeologist who discovered this graveyard said to me, if you told me 3 stories that your grandfather told you, I'd be very interested in hearing them, but I would take them with a grain of salt. We're skeptics. We rely on ground proof. Proof in the ground that something is what you say. And that to me is kind of thrilling. So I ended up thinking basically that they're doing the most important work. And saving bits of our cultural history, well, that interests me very much. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say to you. I could read you another snippet, or we could throw it open for questions, or you could decide. I mean, I'm happy to sit here and tell you archaeological stories as long as I can, but yes. Oh, I do have a little bit of a show and tell. I'll end with my show and tell, and then if you want to ask questions, we'll do that. I don't collect pieces. You don't save the artifacts from your dig, obviously. That's not done. And who wants them anyway? But people have given me some very interesting things. So I have a collection of what I'm beginning to think of as artifacts of my tour. And the first one was a friend who was, she's college educated, and she decided that she was going to give me a very rare Barbie that she had in her collection. It was in the box, and I immediately tore it out of the box, which horrified her. But it was, oh, she loses her boots all the time. This is paleontology Barbie. Okay? So I really didn't know what to say. I'm not doing paleontologist. There's actually a big distinction. She has little dinosaurs on her camp shirt here, and inside the bag, this is the kind of thing that Barbie dug up. It must be, you know, it's a baby T-Rex, I guess, right? So anyway, so I have renamed her for my purposes, Excavating Barbie. And I bring her around with me because, you know, because she's really kind of fantastic. I'm not going to forget the boot, don't worry. Thank you. I also got from a friend something that I'd be happy to pass around. It's called a prehistoric laser pointer. Now it's in the shape of a point, a really quite lovely point, and it's actually a laser. So if I had a slideshow, you could see that. But I kept it in the packaging because it has this great little leaping cat along with some petroglyphs here. Also great for cats. This, the people at Norwalk Community College presented me with my own golden Marshalltown trowel, which is, somehow the art department at my publisher could not get the message. You wouldn't believe the tools that they originally had on the cover of this. None of them. They were not tools that archaeologists would use. And in fact, the little picks that they use here are more paleontology or geology than archaeology, but that was this. A group of archaeologists read and reviewed the book for a little book club, for a stunt that somebody did for one of the New Yorker blogs. And they said, oh yeah, the hard jobs, yeah, she got that part right, yeah, she got that part right. What did she get wrong? This trowel wouldn't last an afternoon. It's like, apparently this is a Home Depot riveted trowel, complete joke, probably costs no more than this beautiful Marshalltown, which you can keep forever and which you're supposed to apparently file to keep sharp. Oh, and carve your initials in it because somebody will steal it if you don't. That we know. And just the other day, I got this in the mail from somebody I really barely know. Remember those Viewmasters? I have a collection now of Viewmaster reels, probing the past, the archaeology reels. And now I'm searching for a Viewmaster. Yeah.
There's a toy store.
Not in every toy store we've found. Yes, no, it's old media. So perhaps you have a question. Art museums, yes, that's a very interesting. There are lots of controversies in archaeology. Did you ask me about art museums? I'm so glad you did. There's a movement afoot to return many of those